42 years of marriage taught me how to recognize when a man is lying. That night, my husband said he had an urgent meeting. But when I called, the secretary hesitated. "Mr. Carter has already left, ma'am." Rain tapped against the windshield as my heart pounded out of rhythm at the sight of the familiar sedan parked in front of street. Mercy Hospital, the place he'd said he went to visit a client's patient. I followed the stark white corridor, each footstep slicing like a knife. Room 312 was lit. He sat beside a young woman, whispering gently, feeding her applesauce, dabbing the corner of her mouth with the dish towel I always fold in our kitchen. She smiled, and he murmured, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." My chest seized. He wore the watch I had bought him, the keepsake I once called our time. Now it measured every second of betrayal. In that instant I knew. Forever was a cruel joke. I didn't cry. I stood still, took out my phone, and hit record. He was nursing his lies with tenderness, and I would nurse justice with silence. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Diane Carter, 65, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. I've been a nurse my whole life, a job that demands patience, precision, and a listening heart. I'm used to the smell of antiseptic, to sleepless nights beside a patient's bed, to staying calm when everything around me is collapsing. I married Leonard Carter, the man I believed would be my love and my anchor for life. We built everything together: a house, 2 children, and what seemed as solid as a healthy, steady heartbeat. People call me old-fashioned, gentle, devoted, always putting others first. Maybe they forget nurses also know how to save themselves. And the night I stepped into room 312 at Street, Mercy Hospital, was the night I began to do just that. I stepped back, gently closed the door without a sound. Cold air from the vent spilled into the hallway and raised goosebumps on my arms. My hands trembled, but my mind was strangely clear. After decades as a nurse, I've witnessed life and death moments, the kind of shock that could make most people buckle. I know how to steady my breath, slow my pulse, and keep emotion from dictating action. I know never confront when you're at a disadvantage. I bent to look through the crack one more time. Leonard was still there, his hand resting on the back of hers, stroking as if soothing a child. She had soft brown hair, a pale face, but she was young, maybe half my age. I glanced at the name board above the bed, Talia Monroe, 30. The name carved into my memory like a blade into wood. I turned away in silence. The antiseptic in the corridor stung my eyes, and I was grateful it kept me alert. The squeak of my rubber soles beat evenly on the white tile, between monitor beeps echoing somewhere like my own heartbeat. When the elevator doors closed, tears surged, but I didn't let them fall. I had to hold everything in so I could see the road ahead. When the elevator opened at the lobby, I pulled out my phone. The screen reflected my face drained, set, no longer the gentle woman of the Carter household. I opened notes and typed, one word at a time. Room 312, Cardiology, Street Mercy Medical Center, 9:47 p.m. Leonard Carter present. Silver watch, the one I gave him for our 40th anniversary. I snapped the patient name board, his license plate outside, even the hallway clock, to lock the time. Every detail could be evidence. Before leaving the building, I paused at the front desk, pretending to ask about an old friend. The young nurse smiled, unaware my hands were trembling from tension. She confirmed, "Oh, Miss Monroe, right? She's been here over a week. Car accident. A week." So all this time, he'd been leaving home at night with overtime excuses to go care for that woman. Outside, the rain still ticked. I leaned against my car and drew a long breath. 42 years from when Leonard was a broke law student to a senior partner at a prestigious firm in Columbus washed away in one shower. But I didn't collapse. I've watched people die on an operating table and still had to stand up and finish my shift. I know how to survive. I opened the car door, sat down, phone in my grip. Over the drum of rain on the roof, I heard my own voice whisper, "Don't confront when you're weak, Diane. Collect, don't vent." I repeated it 3 times like a vow. As I pulled out of the lot, I saw in the rear view, room 312 still burning. That light framed the silhouette of the man who once swore he'd only love me. When I got home, I switched off the lights, changed, and brewed mint tea like always. Routine stayed intact not because I was calm, but because I needed my cover. People don't suspect those who keep doing the usual things. I sat in the armchair by the window, looking out at the backyard where we'd thrown our daughter's birthday parties. Everything looked the same, but I knew, in one night, I had become someone else. My phone buzzed a text from Leonard. "Just finished the meeting. I'll be late. Go to bed first." I stared at it for a long time, then saved it into a new folder, Project 312. I knew that from this moment, love had given way to something else. A plan. I opened my laptop, created a folder named Project 312, and set a timer on the screen. Day 1. A small line appeared. Timer started. I leaned back and sipped a lukewarm tea. In the quiet house, only the wall clock ticked. The second hand kept circling, measuring each moment until the truth came to light. I opened contacts and scrolled to Simone Brooks. My sister, she'd been a private investigator for years before retiring. We weren't as close as we used to be, but I knew if anyone could help me now, it was her. I called. Simone's voice was husky with sleep. "Sis, what's going on?" I drew a breath, steadying my tone. "Simone, I don't need him. I need the truth." A brief silence on the line, then Simone answered, firm, "Start from the beginning." I smiled my first smile of the night, not of happiness but of awakening. From that second on, Leonard was no longer the center of my life. The truth was, and I'd follow it until I found myself again. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside the quiet house, my laptop glowed, Project 312 status, in progress. I stared at it like a new promise. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid anymore. I only thought, "You chose to lie in the dark, Leonard. I will drag you into the light." I met Leonard when I was 23, at the Ohio State University Hospital. I was a night shift medical surgical nurse 12 hours a day, rotating between heart monitor alarms and soft groans behind curtains. He was a law intern tending to his father, who was being treated for pneumonia. The first day we met, Leonard was neatly dressed, but his shoes were worn thin and the leather strap was about to snap. He asked to borrow my pen to sign the admission form, and when he returned it, he said, "I'll buy a good pen to repay you someday." I just smiled, never knowing that decades later, he'd indeed have finer pens, and no idea how to use them for the right thing. In the early years, we were broke but happy. I worked nights, he studied days. In the evenings, we sat in the hospital cafeteria, reading side by side. I remember the smell of watered-down coffee and the flicker of fluorescent lights overhead. We dreamed of a small house with a wooden porch, 2 kids running in the yard, and a future without debt. I believed that with love and hard work, we'd be fine. And for many years, we were. We married 3 years later, bought our first home in Columbus with a small mortgage. Our son came first, Evan, then our daughter, Naomi. I worked double shifts so Leonard could finish law school. When he got a job at a small firm, I cried with pride. I thought, I picked the right man. We slogged through the busy years together, raising kids, paying down debt, fixing a roof, saving for college. I still remember the nights he brought flowers, sometimes just a bunch of yellow daisies from the corner store, saying there didn't need to be a special occasion, just because you deserve it. I believed in those simple things. Time passed. The kids left home. Dinner shrank to 2 people, the long table stretching, the chair across from me often empty. At first I thought the silence between us was natural after so many hectic years. Who doesn't need some quiet? Then I realized silence has a sound of its own. Leonard changed cologne. A new scent, louder and younger, not the warm, woody notes he used to wear. He changed his work hours, came home later, started saying generic lines, "I've got a client. I need to stop by a partner's office." Don't. Wait up. I wasn't suspicious, just a little stung. One night while folding laundry, I noticed several dress shirts I'd never seen, pricey brand, new tags, a different fabric softener scent. I frowned. Not from jealousy, something felt off. I began to track small things. The ink on a document he'd left out had changed, no longer his usual Parker, but an upscale Mont Blanc with LM engraved on the cap. I wondered what the M stood for. One day, while tidying his desk, I found a receipt from an upscale downtown restaurant clearly marked "Dinner for 2." The date matched my night shift. When I asked, he brushed it off. A female client, nothing big. I nodded, but a chill settled in. A few weeks later, in his desk drawer, I found other receipts: jewelry, perfume, gift cards, all purchased by Leonard Carter, but the phone number for pickup wasn't mine. He'd never given me things like that. One morning, as I tucked socks into his drawer, a small envelope slipped out. Inside was a spa gift certificate that read, "Monroe Aesthetics, because you deserve the very best." I stood still. Monroe. That surname would haunt me later. That night, I opened my computer and entered the Project 312 folder. I began logging everything, like a case that required monitoring. February 3rd, Tiffany jewelry receipt, $1,200. February 10th, Monroe Aesthetics gift card, $350. February 14th, Leonard late, says he's taking a female client out. I opened his calendar and marked in red. Every night he left after 7. Each time with a meeting. Comparing the patterns, most were Tuesdays and Thursdays, the nights he was always late because of contracts. Nursing taught me, never conclude without enough data. Emotion skews the diagnosis. I applied that rule to my own life. No hasty conclusions. Every detail must be provable. I gathered evidence, receipts, emails, bank spending logs. I quietly logged into our joint account, fully legal, because we co-own it. A recurring transfer popped up. Mercy Foundation, $500 a month. He'd never mentioned donating to any charity. When I checked, the Mercy Foundation was actually the Inpatient Assistance Fund at Street Mercy Medical Center. My heart sped up, but not from fear this time. The pieces were lining up. I carefully enabled Find My iPhone with family location sharing. Leonard didn't question it. I'd once suggested it in case we misplaced a phone. For 3 weeks, I watched in silence. A pattern emerged. Every Tuesday and Thursday, his location stayed put at the same spot, Street Mercy Medical Center. I remembered the night before, the cold, white glare of room 312 reflected in my eyes like metal. I opened my notebook and added, location, Street Mercy, 7:14 p.m. to 9:52 p.m. Frequency, consistently twice a week. Each detail was a small needle, tiny, but sharp, enough to pierce. I didn't cry while writing anymore. I simply logged, line by line, timestamps and amounts, like a witness building a case file. One evening, Leonard came home, that new cologne drifting into the kitchen. He kissed my cheek and asked, "Did you eat?" Like nothing was wrong. I smiled and answered softly, I did. You should eat too, you must be tired. He didn't know that every word, every gesture was going into Project 312 not to hold a grudge, but to hold evidence. I began to see how love, if left to erode, turns into numbers. Line items, excuses, prolonged absences. Looking at the bank records, it hit me. My marriage, once built on trust, had become an expense sheet paid like clockwork. That night I sat in the living room. The laptop's blue glow in the dark. The sound of rain at the window mixed with the clock's tick, like a syringe landing on a metal tray, cold and final. I told myself, it's okay, Diane. People can lie, but data doesn't. I saved the file and stared at Project 312, Day 10. Everything had only just begun. This time, I was the one holding the syringe, not to save anyone else, but to draw the poison out of my own life. One weekday noon, under gentle sunlight, I stopped by Leonard's firm with a lunch he likes: pot roast and multigrain bread I'd cooked early that morning. It used to be our habit, but I hadn't done it in a long time. As I entered the lobby, the young receptionist looked up, startled. Mrs. Carter, I mean Mr. Leonard's wife? Her voice stumbled, eyes darting toward his office door as if afraid of being overheard. I smiled and said lightly, Yes, I'm his wife. That made her even more flustered. Mr. Carter is in a meeting. Would you like me to leave the lunch for him? I shook my head. No, I can wait. Wait meant I sat exactly 3 minutes. Leonard stepped out, clearly not expecting me. He froze, a flicker of annoyance rather than surprise, crossing his face. Why didn't you call first? I handed him the lunch with a familiar smile. I wanted to surprise you. He took it, set it on the desk, but didn't open it. Just said, I've got a tight meeting. I'll eat later. Then he nudged the bag aside, as if it were out of place on his neat desk. I looked at him and said nothing. The way he touched that lunch lightly, but enough for me to understand. My care had become a habit he was eager to shed. I nodded, smiled once more, and left, the smell of pot roast lingering with his expensive cologne. At the door, the receptionist called after me, Have a nice day, ma'am. She sounded more at ease once I'd turned away. That evening I reread a few notes in Project 312. Around 8 p.m., Leonard called. I heard soft background noise, the rattle of a metal cart, and his voice whispering, I'm staying at the hospital with Talia. She hasn't eaten all day, worried she'll get weak again. I answered quietly, Be careful. When he hung up, I opened the recorder. The call lasted under 2 minutes, but it was enough to save. I titled it, File #7. Indirect Admission. Near midnight, I passed his desk. His phone was charging, a notification lighting the screen. I don't make a habit of invading privacy, but years together taught me this. When someone is hiding something, your silence makes them bold enough to slip. I glanced at the screen, just a small line in Emergency Info. Emergency contact. Leonard Carter, fiancé. I didn't believe my eyes. Fiancé. That means engaged. Not husband. Not friend. The man she's going to marry. I snapped a screenshot and saved it to Project 312. Evidence that can't be argued. I opened my notes and added, March 26th, direct proof confirming an engagement. Victim, Diane Carter. I looked at that line and almost laughed. Victim, I really was charting like I did for patients. Except in this surgery, I was both the one on the table and the doctor holding the scalpel. The next day at lunch, I messaged Laura, an old colleague at Street Mercy. She's still the admin nurse for cardiac trauma rehab. I wrote briefly, Laura, do you have a patient named Talia Monroe? About 30, car accident. Need to verify. She replied in minutes. Yes. In room 312. Registered primary caregiver. Mr. Leonard Carter. He's here almost every evening. Is everything okay, Diane? I typed back, "Thank you, it's fine." But inside, a heavy wave rose. That night, Leonard came home late. I heard the garage, his familiar steps. I pretended to watch the news, like every night. He walked in, took off his coat, hung it on the chair. There was an issue at the hospital. I had to help, he said. I nodded with a gentle smile. You worked hard. He kissed my forehead, but his breath carried a scent that wasn't mine. I kept my smile quietly. When he went, upstairs to shower, I opened my phone, hit record again. Moments later, I heard his voice through the bathroom door. Clear, intimate, tender. Sleep well, Talia. I'll be there soon. I love you. I sat still, watching the bathroom lights spill through the crack, listening to the water run. Each drop was a countdown to when I'd no longer be the woman standing behind him. I set the phone on the table, my hands trembling slightly, but my voice steady as I murmured to myself, I've heard enough, Leonard. The next morning, I moved. I drove to the supermarket and bought a wall plug-in hidden camera that looked like an essential oil diffuser. The clerk showed me how to set it up. I nodded, memorizing every step. To anyone else, I was a picky retiree installing home security. Nobody knew I was preparing to collect proof of betrayal. Back home, I hid the device in the living room, pointed at the corner where Leonard usually made calls. His habit was to speak softly near the visitors' window, where reception was best. I plugged it in and test recorded. Everything worked smoothly. That evening, he was late again. I brought tea upstairs, acting oblivious. As he finished his shower, I asked lightly, Are you still going to Street Mercy? He flinched, then recovered. Yeah, a couple of patients need help with insurance forms. I smiled. I was just asking. I poured the tea and set it on the table. He turned to look at me, eyes slightly suspicious. But I'd learned how to play the role of the vague, gentle wife who suspected nothing, like an actress who knows her lines by heart. When he left the room, I opened my phone and tracked his location through the app. Same spot, Street Mercy. Showing up at 7 p.m., disappearing near 10 p.m. Everything was so perfect it was brazen. 2 days later, the camera captured the first conversation. Leonard sat on the sofa, his voice low, full of tenderness. We'll have a future of our own. You understand? Just a little more time, I promise. I listened to that recording 3 times, not to hurt myself, but to etch the way he pronounced future of our own. Each word clear, without hesitation. The voice of a man who had decided to erase the past. I saved the audio file and named it File Has Shown a One, a Lying Promise. That night, I opened my laptop and the Project 312 folder. 17 files lay in order like a medical chart approaching completion. I looked at them, empty inside but lucid. I knew this wasn't suspicion anymore. It was a confirmed diagnosis. Leonard Carter, systematic. Prolonged infidelity. Misuse of joint assets. Exploiting professional standing. I didn't fall apart. I just felt cold. Cold like the emergency room where I used to work, where people stay calm even as a patient's breath slips away. I changed from pajamas into jeans and a light jacket, slipped on sneakers. It had been a long time since I drove at night just to breathe. I needed the feel of cold air. Sweeping my face to remember I was still alive. On the way back, I stopped at a gas station and bought a bottle of water. A sign next to the cashier read, "Nothing hurts like the truth, but nothing saves us, except it." I stared at that sentence for a long time, like a sign. Back home, I composed a text to Simone, typing slowly. Time to open the parallel case. I hit send. The screen immediately showed delivered. I knew that from that moment, my quiet war had officially begun. Not to win back the man who betrayed me, but to reclaim the truth, the only thing he couldn't buy with money or promises. On Monday morning, Simone called while I was sitting in the little cafe near the hospital, the place I went to avoid Leonard whenever he used the excuse, staying late at the office. My sister's voice came through the phone, calm but edged with urgency. "Sis, I've got it. The lease. Leonard Carter and Talia Monroe. 22 months. I gripped my coffee cup until my hand trembled slightly. 22 months, I repeated, as if I needed to hear my own mouth say it to believe it. Simone exhaled. Yes, address, Maple Street, apartment 4B. Rent is $1,950 a month, paid by automatic transfer from your and his joint savings account. I said nothing. I only heard the emptiness in my chest like a hospital corridor at midnight. I thought of all the times I tried to save, postponed retirement travel plans, delayed repairing the roof, because the budget's tight this year. Now I knew where the budget went. Anything else? I asked. Yes. The building's neighbor provided security camera footage. It clearly shows Leonard in and out every weekend carrying bags of essentials, sometimes a toolbox, sometimes a big water jug. There's even a scene where he kisses her goodbye right at the apartment door. Coincidentally, that same evening you called him and he said he was at the office. I drew a deep breath, not to hold back tears, but to keep my heart rate from spinning out. Send me everything. I want it all saved to Project 312. Simone hesitated. Sis, there's something else. There's a police report. Talia Monroe had a car accident hit the median leaving the Maple apartment. Time, 7:15 p.m., 2 weeks before the day you saw them at street. Mercy. I closed my eyes and the hospital room surfaced again. The smell of applesauce, the stark white light, Leonard's hand spooning food into a young woman's mouth. Was he there when the accident happened? I asked. Not clear, but according to the report, Leonard Carter was the first person called to the scene. Police list him as the emergency contact. And the hospital? Street. Mercy confirms he signed all the medical paperwork, consent for surgery, authorization for transfusion, even the insurance forms. He signed as fiancé, her intended. In your opinion, which line is the worst here? Using joint money for a parallel life or signing medical authority as if the wife doesn't exist? Share a few lines with me about what gnaws at you the most. I squeezed the phone until my knuckles whitened. The man who once said he'd hold my hand until my last breath was now holding a pen to sign for someone else with authority only a legal wife should have. Simone went on. I also mapped the spending. From the credit cards and the joint account. The big items, jewelry, spa, furniture, all align with nights he worked late. Every receipt, every location, down to the hour. Her voice was firm, as cool as reading an indictment. This isn't a brief affair, sis. This is a parallel life. I went quiet for a few seconds, then I answered slowly, I don't want to hold on. I only want justice. On the other end, Simone exhaled, her tone softer but steely. Good. Then we'll do this the right way. That evening we met at her apartment. Simone had everything laid out on the table: laptop, printed files, a USB with the security footage, bank statements, and the Maple Street lease. I saw my name on the joint savings account line, used to pay the rent as if I'd signed this betrayal myself without knowing. Sis, let me read it clearly, Simone said, flipping pages. Lease, signed June 8th, 2 years ago. Security deposit for 3 months. Paid by transfer from account ending 4829, that's the same account you used to pay Naomi's college tuition. I let out a dry laugh. So our daughter finished school, and her father started a new course with someone else. Simone didn't smile. She was solemn. Sis, I'm serious. This is beyond a moral line. He didn't just cheat. He misused marital assets and misrepresented his marital status to gain legal authority for his lover. If we find more proof of personal transfers, I can structure this as financial fraud. I nodded. My voice small but steady. Do it. I'm not afraid of scandal, not of public opinion. I just want everything in the open. Simone opened her laptop and typed fast. I've contacted a civil litigator, Rachel Miles, an old friend. She agreed to a free preliminary consult, but for the court to accept the case, we need a clear legal checklist. She pulled a chair closer and placed a sheet divided into 2 columns in front of me. Civil evidence. Criminal indicators. Under civil evidence, she wrote. 1. Maple Street lease confirms the parallel life. 2. Joint savings statements prove misuse of marital assets. 3. Security camera data confirms frequency of contact. 4. Receipts for jewelry, spa, furniture, spending outside the marriage. 5. Recordings and texts, verbal admissions of the relationship. And under criminal, Simone added, 1. Misrepresentation of marital status. Registering as medical decision-maker, claiming fiancé. On 2. Financial fraud. Using joint accounts for personal purposes. 3. Breach of trust and document fraud. I looked at the list, each line like a cold blade. But instead of pain, I felt clarity sharper than ever. This was no longer marital conflict or an affair. It was a system calculated, deliberate. That night, the attorney, Rachel Miles, came to meet us. She was around 40, compact, sharp-eyed. After reading everything, she said, "Honestly, Diane, you have more than most of my clients bring in when they first see a lawyer. Most women arrive in panic. You've brought in a nearly complete file." I smiled faintly. Maybe because I was a nurse, I'm used to keeping a patient alive when everyone else is losing their head. Rachel nodded, leaning in. Good. Now you need one thing, patience. All of this must be collected legally. Absolutely no accessing private accounts or recording where he has full privacy. I nodded. Understood. Everything you see is within legal bounds. Joint accounts, shared home, shared devices. Simone added, there's another angle. If we prove Leonard planned to use Talia's mental state to profit from insurance or move assets, we can request an insurance fraud investigation. Rachel jotted notes. Excellent. But we need at least 3 more elements. 1. Financial records showing intent to transfer funds. 2. Hospital confirmation of medical decision-making authority. 3. An action showing Leonard deliberately kept Diane out of critical information. I closed my eyes, recalling room 312. When Leonard spoon-fed Talia, there was no shame or fear in his eyes. It was the gaze of a man who believed he'd never get caught. Rachel continued, I'll help you prepare the preliminary file. When we have enough, we'll file for divorce and a financial complaint simultaneously. 2 tracks in parallel. But first, you must stay calm and live as if nothing's happening. Any impulsive move could tip him off. I looked at her and said evenly, Rachel, staying calm is my profession. I've kept people alive through heart attacks. I can keep myself alive through betrayal. She smiled and packed her papers. Good, I like working with someone like you. After Rachel left, Simone brewed 2 cups of chamomile tea. We sat in silence, listening to the tick of the clock. Finally, she whispered, Sis, are you scared? I shook my head. No. I've been scared for too many years. Now I just feel light. Light because I finally know the truth. I watched the steam curl up. You know, back at work, any time a doctor misdiagnosed, I'd tell them, if you don't find the real source, the patient will never recover. Marriage is the same. To heal, you have to know the cause. And if the cause is deceit, there's only one remedy, the truth. Simone nodded. Then we keep going. From now on, everything related to Talia and the Maple apartment goes into the main file. We'll name the folder Talia Case File T. I agreed. We both looked at the computer screen. Folders opened. Project 312, Evidence Bank, Talia Case. 3 names, 3 stages of betrayal, and the 3 needles I'd used to stitch my life back together. That night, when I got home, Leonard was asleep. The hallway light washed across his face. The man I'd loved for 42 years lay there, peaceful as if he'd never betrayed anyone. I watched him for a long time, then turned away and stepped quietly into the study. On the laptop screen, a line glowed in the dark. Checklist. Complete financial file, verify Maple lease, verify medical authority, prepare witness statements. I set my hand on the mouse and added one last line. Objective. Not revenge. Only justice by truth, not by tears. Then I switched off the light. In the dark, the clock ticked steadily, no longer time passing, but a countdown to justice. I chose Friday afternoon to execute the plan. Late sunlight slipped through the blinds, laying a sad gold over the house. Leonard sat in the study, typing on his laptop. I stood at the doorway, hand lightly gripping my purse strap, and said as calmly as I could, "Leonard, I think I need some time. Just a few days. I'm going to stay with my sister to think things through." He looked up, surprise flickering across his face, then almost sighed with relief. "If you think that's best for both of us, I respect it. No hand squeeze, no why, no effort to hold on, just the relief of someone relieved of duty." I smiled and nodded. "Make sure you eat your meals. Don't work too late." He replied, "You too." And that was it. After 42 years, we said goodbye with a conversation colder than our decaying marriage. When I left the house, I didn't look back. Simone was waiting in the car. She glanced at me and asked softly, "You okay?" I nodded. "Okay, now for the next step." Before leaving, we'd prepared carefully. For 2 straight nights, Simone and I installed 5 hidden cameras throughout the house. One in the living room aimed at the sofa, where Leonard liked to sit. One in the kitchen disguised as an oil diffuser. One in the hallway. One in the bedroom, and one in the garage where he stored things. All connected to Simone's private server. No sounds, no lights, no vibrations. Enough to capture every word, every gesture. I was the first to call it the golden condition, meaning I absolutely could not come home unexpectedly, so he'd have the space to expose himself. If I showed up, the plan collapsed. "You'll stay at my place for a week," Simone said. "From now on, think of it as a tactical disappearance." I gave a tired smile. Nice phrase. Like when a nurse steps out of the OR to see if the surgeon truly knows what he's doing. 36 hours later, Leonard took the bait. Sunday afternoon, on the laptop screen in Simone's living room, the camera feed was clear. Leonard opened the Midison door, supporting a young woman, Talia Monroe. She wore a thin coat, her arm in a cast, her face pale but with a strangely bright look. Leonard guided her inside like he was bringing his new wife home. Seeing it, I clenched my teacup until the porcelain rim hairline cracked. Simone placed a hand on my shoulder. "Stay calm. The more comfortable he is, the more evidence we get." He led Talia through each room. The living room camera recorded every step. "This is where I've lived for over 40 years, he said proudly. "But soon I'll change everything. These photos," he pointed to the wall of our wedding photo, family pictures. "The kids will be replaced with our memories." Hearing that, my throat tightened. Talia looked up at him and smiled softly. "Really? This house will be ours?" "Yes," Leonard answered without hesitation. "Everything will belong to you." I choked back a sob as tears slipped before I could stop them. Simone squeezed my podiment, tanned, and whispered, "Don't react, let him keep talking." The kitchen feed shifted. Leonard stood by Talia, opened the fridge, pointed at the trays of food I'd prepped. "She likes to cook, but she can't keep the flavor," he said, half pity, half mockery. "I'll have someone clear it out. This house needs fresh air." Simone ground her teeth. I only murmured, "Let him talk. He's digging his own pit." In the bedroom, the image nearly took my breath. Leonard settled Talia on my side of the bed, the place I'd slept for decades, where I'd kept vigil when he was sick, where I'd prayed through our son's first surgery. He adjusted her pillow, smoothed her hair, coaxed, "Rest. You need your meds on time. Don't worry about anything. You're safe now." Talia smiled weakly and took his hand. I looked at that hand and saw Leonard's wedding ring still there, the ring I'd had engraved with our names. Simone leaned toward me and whispered, "We've got audio, video, intimate behavior in the marital residence. More than enough to establish actual adultery in the divorce petition." But Leonard wasn't done. The garage camera caught him dragging a big suitcase and a carton labeled "Diane, Memories" into a corner. He opened it, pulled out a few frames and old albums. A photo from Myrtle Beach, he glanced at it and set it down, muttering, "None of this means anything anymore." I heard every word, his voice low, tired, calmly cruel. Talia stepped over, looking around the garage. "Is this all hers?" Leonard nodded. "Yeah. Diane's the kind who keeps everything. Memories, receipts, even things nobody needs." "I want to forget it all." "Are you sure she won't come back early?" "No. She said she needs time to think. You know, Diane, she believes people need quiet to heal. She'll never suspect." I laughed bitterly, hearing my own name used as a synonym for naive, trusting to the point of blindness. He didn't know the gentle wife was recording every second of his betrayal. Leonard slid the carton against the wall and draped a thin tarp over it. Talia wrapped her arms around him from behind and whispered, "Now this house is clean. Let's begin." He answered, "Yes, let's begin." That image, two people in the house I built, among the keepsakes I cherished, was stronger than any paperwork. My love had been pronounced dead in the very place it was born. When the video ended, I sat still for a long time. Simone said nothing, just set a small notebook in front of me. "Better write everything down. Date, time, what you felt, every detail. This will be an evidence journal." I opened to the first page and wrote in slow, deliberate script. Day 3, they started erasing me. I paused and looked out the window. The Ohio night sky was heavy with clouds, the streetlight burning like a low flame. I told myself, "Fine, Leonard, you erase me from that house, but I'm rewriting the truth line by line, indelible." Simone sat beside me, reviewing the saved files on the computer. "Framing is clear. Audio is clear. Faces are clear. No way to deny it. Want to watch again?" I shook my head. "No, I've seen enough. We just need to keep it safe." She nodded and saved the files to 2 separate drives, both password protected. "We'll call this Phase 2, the self-exposure phase." I gave a thin smile. Fitting. A clever man like Leonard ends up confessing on his own. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window and wrote more in the journal. Day 4, the house I once called a home, is now a set for deceit. Day 5, they live as if I never existed. Day 6, I remain silent. Silence, sometimes, is the loudest noise. I closed the notebook, set it on the table, and said softly to myself, "A tactical disappearance doesn't mean vanishing. It's the way you let others reveal themselves." And it was true. I was no longer the naive woman waiting for a late husband. I was the one collecting evidence drop by drop, frame by frame, not for revenge, but to prove that when trust is abused, it becomes the sharpest weapon in the hand of the one who once believed. Leonard had no idea that the peace he was enjoying was the trap I laid, soft, silent, with only the light of justice waiting to break. The next morning I sat in Simone's living room, eyes glued to the laptop. The live feed from the bedroom camera played, early light slipping through the blinds in pale bands across the wood floor. And there, Talia Monroe, the other woman, sat before the old oak vanity Leonard had given me for our 15th anniversary. She checked the mirror, tilted her head, brushed her hair, moving as if this were her room. Leonard stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, smiling with a tenderness that turned my stomach. On the vanity, a worn blue velvet jewelry box lay open. I saw my mother's pearl necklace, the piece she left me in her will. Talia lifted it, tried it on, admired herself. Leonard said, voice gentle, "This is for you, it suits you better." I bit my lip until it bled. In the frame, Talia's hand stroked her neck. She looked up at herself in the mirror and smiled with satisfaction. I wanted to scream, to rush in and snatch that piece back, but Simone put a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Let him keep going. This is evidence of using emotionally valuable and inherited property. At this level, the court will view it as intentional emotional harm." I nodded, tears sliding down but not falling onto the keyboard. The living room camera cut to another angle. Leonard and Talia were inspecting the china cabinet, the wedding set we bought with our first savings. Talia picked up a teacup and sneered, "It looks so tacky, like an old lady's house." Leonard nodded. "I'll have it all cleared out. That wall clock, too. It's loud, old-fashioned. That clock was the one he chose on our first trip to New York. I remember him saying, 'Let it chime each morning to remind us we're alive and in love.' Now he was the one saying he wanted to throw it away." Talia went to the wardrobe. I watched her open the door, pull out the blue nurse scrub I'd worn for 30 years on the job. She wrinkled her nose, pinched it between two fingers, and said coldly, "Hospital smell. Gross." Then she threw it straight into the trash bag. I trembled. That wasn't just a uniform. It was the life I'd given, the place I'd saved people, where my sweat and tears had fallen. Leonard just stood and watched, not stopping her. He even smiled and murmured, "Throw everything out. You deserve the new space." I gulped for air. Simone quietly pressed the time-stamped note button on the software, her voice calm like an investigator. "Mark this segment. Note: removal of lawful spouse's personal property indicates intent to erase existence." I couldn't speak. All the sounds in my head were a dry crack, something breaking in my chest. The next footage nearly paralyzed me. Leonard took our wedding photo down from the wall. That picture had hung in the living room for 42 years, the one every guest stopped to look at. He put it into a cardboard box, along with photos of our son Evan and our daughter Naomi. Talia stood beside him and asked, "Aren't you afraid they'll be mad?" Leonard shrugged. "The past doesn't need to be here anymore." Those 4 words fell like a hammer. "The past doesn't need to be here anymore." I whispered to myself. "The past doesn't need to be here, but justice will remain." I didn't take my eyes off the screen. The image shifted to the study. Leonard picked up my framed certificates, the recognitions for 30 years of service in nursing, and tossed them into a sack. He said as he worked, "We'll turn this into a reading room. No need for this old stuff." Simone was silent. She whispered, "This is enough." The act of insulting, devaluing, and destroying a spouse's keepsakes, that's grounds to list intentional emotional harm. I said nothing. My hands shook, but I didn't turn off the screen. I had to see it through. In the corner, Talia sat laughing in the chair where I used to sit and write prescriptions. She picked up a pen, doodled on a blank sheet, and asked, "What will you write first in this new room?" Leonard bent down and kissed her forehead. "I'll write that this house belongs to you." My chest felt crushed. That sentence echoed again, clear and slow, and the camera recorded it in full. Simone immediately added a note, "Statement affirming intent to seize marital property. Basis: Statute 3105, regarding unlawful appropriation of marital assets. I let out a dry laugh. Tears fell. "He's tied the noose himself, Simone," she replied, "and you're holding the other." And I sat motionless, watching the images. Leonard and Talia were on the sofa, opening a bottle of wine I'd saved for our 30th anniversary. "I remember the day we chose that bottle in Napa Valley," he said. "When we retire, we'll open it." And now he opened it with someone else. Simone recorded another clip and saved it to a hard drive labeled Phase 3 Crown Theft Stage. My third party crowns herself. The name sounded tragic and accurate at once. After all the data was saved, Simone printed the photos and organized them in chronological order. Them entering the house, her putting on the pearls, tossing the scrub, taking down the wedding photo, throwing away the certificates. Everything numbered, with dates and timestamps and facial comparisons. She said, "You know, when we present this in court, these photos won't just be legal evidence. There'll be a moral sentence." I nodded, voice low. "That sentence has already been written, Simone." She looked at me and said nothing more. I opened the little notebook and wrote, "Day 5, the moral sentence has been written." I put the pen down and felt my hand lighten. Not because the pain vanished, but because I knew I had reclaimed the right to look straight at the truth. That night, when it was just the two of us, Simone turned on a soft bedside lamp. She asked, "Do you regret it? Installing the cameras, recording everything?" I answered evenly, "No. Regret is for the wrongdoer. I'm just taking back what belongs to me, the truth, my dignity, and the crown they stole." She smiled sadly. "So what's next?" I closed the notebook and looked her in the eye. "The next step is to make him read that sentence word for word in the most public place." Outside, the wind blew through the maple trees, leaves falling across the yard. I looked up. The sky was black, but a single star flickered. I told myself, even if people try to erase your traces, light finds its way back. And this time, it will illuminate every action, every word of Leonard Carter, the man who once promised to love me for life, but who ultimately helped me discover the real strength of a woman who was betrayed and did not break. When we had gathered all the evidence from the house, I thought I'd reached the end of the truth. I was wrong. What Simone discovered next made me realize Leonard wasn't only betraying one wife, he was plotting to take over my whole life. I started by using old professional connections in healthcare. 35 years as a nurse meant I knew many trustworthy colleagues. I did nothing illegal. I simply asked them for expert consultation on Talia Monroe's medical records at Street Mercy, through the proper channels and under the guise of professional oversight. 3 days later, an old friend, the head nurse in the rehabilitation unit, called me. Her voice trembled a little as she said, "Diane, I can't send the official records, but I can read the clinical summary to you." I grabbed a pen and opened my notebook. She read slowly, each word like a knife in my chest. Patient, Talia Monroe, female, 30 years old. Condition, minor injuries after a traffic collision. Psychiatric note by Dr. R. Hale. Patient shows despair, repeatedly saying, "My boyfriend won't divorce as promised," and expressing, "I want everything to end." Preliminary conclusion, the collision may be intentional self-harm. Recommendation, hold for 72 hours for psychiatric observation and prevention of recurrence. I squeezed the pen until the nib broke. Who signed as next of kin? My friend answered softly. The signatory was Leonard Carter. Under relationship, he wrote fiancé, and the medical authorization signature is his as well. I held my breath. All the pieces fit together. Dr. Hale added a note. The fiancé described the ex-wife, currently not legally divorced, as emotionally unstable and extremely jealous, posing risk to the patient. I sat motionless, each line like a pinprick. He, the man I shared 4 decades with, was building a case to portray me as unstable. I sent all the information to Simone. A few hours later, she arrived at my house with her laptop. "Sis, I checked Street Mercy's payment system," Simone said, voice icy. "The finance department log shows Leonard Carter reached out 3 times. He inquired about long-term payment options for 2 potential patients." I frowned. 2 patients? "Yes," Simone said. "One is Talia Monroe, the woman he calls his fiancée. The other is Diane Carter." I froze. "Say that again," Leonard asked them. "If my wife becomes incapacitated, can I transfer asset management and medical decision-making to my name?" The finance log recorded the internal calls. The room became hard to breathe in. Simone continued in a low voice. "Sis, he's building a guardianship file. If successful, he'd have full legal control of assets, accounts, and your medical decisions." I leaned back in the chair. Now it was clear. Leonard wasn't just betraying or stealing, he planned to erase me with legal seals. Simone handed me a backup copy. It included the medical authorization forms, consent for procedures, and the call log between Leonard and the hospital finance department, all time-stamped and legally extracted. "This," Simone said, "is enough for Rachel to review for possible fraud charges." I took the folder to Rachel the next morning. She read every page, her gaze sharp as a blade. When she reached the part where Leonard described me as emotionally unstable, she paused and inhaled. "He's creating a medical pretext to get the court to believe you lack capacity. If he files for guardianship, you could temporarily lose control of assets, even the right to sign legal documents. This is a sophisticated abuse strategy." Rachel opened her laptop, typed a few lines, and then said, "We're looking at 3 illegal acts here. 1. Healthcare insurance fraud using misrepresented status to obtain payment. 2. Misuse of marital assets, using joint marital accounts to pay for the lover's expenses. 3. Conspiracy for improper guardianship, fabricating medical grounds to seize legal authority." I sat quietly, my heart steady. Rachel continued, "If we can prove he's intentionally smearing your mental state to justify guardianship, this stops being a civil case. It becomes criminal prosecution." I looked at her, voice small but clear. "I don't want revenge. I just want to stop him from hurting anyone else." Rachel nodded. "I know. But you also need to protect yourself. I promise. This time he won't get away with it." When Rachel left, I sat with Simone and looked at Leonard's signatures on the documents. His handwriting was the same, neat, confident, slightly right-leaning. People say, handwriting reflects personality. A right slant can indicate someone who seeks to control others' futures. I smiled bitterly. Simone pulled up the data. "Look," she said, pointing at the screen. "All the large transfers start a week after Talia was admitted. He withdrew $15,000 from the joint account, noted medical support. The hospital confirms they only received $8,000. "Where did the rest go?" I asked. "Can you trace it?" "We're working on it. It's likely routed through an intermediary account used for investments or personal insurance." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. All my life, I had trusted medical records as a sacred place for truth and care. Now, my own husband had turned them into a tool to erase me with paperwork, stamps, and signatures. Simone's voice tightened. "He wants both women in his life incapacitated. One self-destructs, one is labeled incapable, then he controls both." I nodded slowly. "He wants to be the only legal decision-maker." That thought sounded like a verdict in my head. Leonard, who once trembled signing our marriage certificate, now signed papers to strip his own spouse of rights. I looked at Simone, my voice hoarse. "You know, He used to tell me when we were young, to love someone is to take responsibility for them until the end. Now he's doing that, but by control, not love. Simone gripped my hand. This time he picked the wrong woman. You're not someone who quietly gets erased. I nodded. No. I write the files. I'm not the one who is filed away. That night I sat alone and reviewed the documents again. The wind rustled the papers. I organized every piece of evidence. The lease, receipts, camera clips, medical authorization forms, call logs, and especially Dr. Hale's notes. Each item labeled and numbered. At the back of the file I wrote in red ink, Objective, expose the entire plan: betrayal, seizure, and legal. Conspiracy. I stared at that line for a long time. Outside, the streetlight cast a glow across my desk. In that moment I understood I was no longer a victim. I sealed the file in a large envelope. Simone asked, "What will you do?" I answered, voice low but determined. "I'll pick the day to expose it. A day he won't expect. Then there will be no yelling, no tears. Just the truth." I turned off the light and looked at my reflection in the window. The face looking back was not the weak woman who cried outside room 312. It was the face of someone who'd seen the whole picture. A man planning to make two women incapacitated so he could rule everything, but in the end, he would lose everything. I whispered to myself, "The day will come, Leonard, and when it does, you'll understand. Some women don't need to scream to be heard. They simply bring the evidence." I closed the file. Tomorrow, I would choose the day to expose him. And from that moment, the clock of justice began its countdown. I chose Friday, our old tradition of family dinner, to close it all. A dinner that would seem warm, but I knew inside. This was no meal, it was a courtroom. I texted Leonard, "I'd like a quiet family dinner, just family and a few close friends. I have something important to say." He replied almost immediately, "I'm so glad. Finally, you want to mend things." I smiled faintly. Mend? No, this was the dinner of judgment, and he would hear the verdict. The guest list was arranged with care. My two children, Evan and Naomi, had been told by Simone and instructed to keep it secret. Leonard's parents, who still believed their son was a paragon of virtue. 3 of Leonard's law partners, the very people he always wanted to impress. 2 close neighbors, an older couple who'd attended our wedding. And finally, Simone's friend, attorney Ava Chen, who would appear as a guest but in fact serve as my legal representative. I asked the chef to prepare Leonard's favorite menu: roast beef, mashed potatoes, and strawberry salad. The table would be set with the wedding china that Talia had called tacky. I wanted it as a symbol, the thing he meant to throw away would witness the night he was unmasked. Before guests arrived, Simone checked the equipment one last time. A small laptop hid in the buffet, connected to a speaker concealed under the tablecloth. I only had to press one button, and the whole truth would play clear, cold, undeniable. Simone placed a printed bank statement, Talia's medical file, and the forged medical authorization Leonard had signed into my handbag. On top, the divorce petition, the demand for compensation, and the temporary restraining order Ava had prepared. I checked the clock. 6:40. Dinner starts at 7. My heart beat slow, not from fear, but because I knew that after tonight, I would be free. When guests arrived, Leonard played the perfect, devoted husband. He greeted at the door, shook hands, smiled, poured wine, told a few legal office jokes, and then whispered to a colleague, "Diane's been a bit unstable lately, but I trust with love and patience she'll be fine." I heard every word and only smiled slightly. He was still acting the benevolent husband role he'd long used to deceive the world. Leonard raised his glass. "I want to thank Diane for organizing tonight. Despite misunderstandings, I always believe our marriage is a gift from God. A polite round of applause. He turned to me. Sweetness, now false. You have something to say, Diane? I set my fork down and smiled. Yes, I do. The room hushed. I glanced at Simone. She nodded. I reached into the buffet and pressed play. Leonard's voice came through the speaker immediately, unmistakable, clear. She's old, we'll replace everything. His laugh, Talia's soft reply. Replace everything, really? Yes. This whole house. She keeps too much of the past. I want it all gone. The table froze. No one moved a fork. Mother-in-law's hand trembled over her glass. Her face drained. Leonard stiffened and jumped up, voice cracking. What the hell is this? I looked him straight in the eye, my voice calm. A little music from the house you want to change. Before he could say more, the laptop switched to the second video footage from the bedroom camera. The image. Leonard settling Talia onto my side of the bed, coaxing her to take medication, then saying softly, "This house belongs to you." There were stifled breaths, his chuckle, dim light. Everything clear enough that no one in the room could misunderstand. Naomi covered her mouth, eyes red. Evan slammed his fist on the table. Dad, how could you do that? Leonard was speechless, pale. It's not what you think. She's sick. I cut him off, voice like a silk knife. The patient you signed in as fiancé and asked to be billed from the joint account? Or the patient you intended to have guardianship over because you claim mother is incapacitated? I signaled Simone. She laid the file on the table and said plainly, "These are bank statements, the forged medical authorization, and the recorded calls between Mr. Leonard Carter and Street Mercy's finance department. All legally verified." Ava Chen, who had been silent until then, produced 3 sealed envelopes from her bag. Her voice was calm but authoritative. I'm the attorney representing Mrs. Diane Carter. On the table are the divorce petition, the claim for material and emotional damages, and the temporary restraining order granted by the court this morning. Leonard froze, spun toward me. You dare do this? I looked at him and smiled, mercilessly mild. It's not me daring, Leonard. You forced my hand. Mother-in-law burst into tears. My God, Leonard, what have you done? Evan took his P's hand. Naomi turned away, tears falling. One of Leonard's partners, Mr. Jensen, stood, his face like ice. Leonard, I think you should step back from the firm. We cannot work with someone who has this kind of medical fraud on his record. Leonard raged. I'm being framed. Diane set this up. She staged everything. Ava slowly placed copies of the server data on the table. No one staged. Everything is extracted from your devices with timestamps, locations, audio and video matching perfectly. You can deny it, but the law won't deny it for you. The room fell into a heavy silence. I watched Leonard tremble not with anger, but with fear. For the first time in years, he looked small. I stood, voice steady and firm. You once said, "The past doesn't need to be here anymore." You were right, but one thing will remain the truth. And tonight it's proven, in front of family, friends, and those who once believed you were a good man. I turned to Ava. Please hand me the last paper. She placed the restraining order on the table, next to Leonard's untouched glass of wine. I pushed it toward him. From now on, you are not allowed to come near me, this house, or any account in my name within 200 meters. Leonard stood frozen. A bead of sweat ran down his forehead. I turned to my in-laws and said gently, I'm sorry you had to witness this. But if I stay silent, Leonard won't just destroy my life, he'll stain the family's honor. My mother-in-law nodded, tears rolling down. You don't need to apologize, Diane. You're taking back what's yours. I looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. No one spoke. Only the wall clock, the one Leonard once wanted to throw away, ticked steadily, beat by beat. Ava gathered the documents and nodded at me. "Everything's done. I'll file the originals with the court in the morning." Simone squeezed my hand, smiling with pride. I turned back to the table and looked at the old china, the plates Talia had called tacky, still gleaming, reflecting my face clearly. I lifted my glass of wine and said calmly, "Dinner is over, but the real trial is just beginning." I took a small sip, drew a deep breath, then murmured as if to myself, "Day 7. The sentence is read. And this time, I'm the one bringing down the gavel." The room sank into a heavy silence. Only the clock on the wall kept its cold, precise ticking, like a verdict. Leonard still stood there, face chalk white, sweat beading on his brow. Mr. Jensen, his longtime partner, was the first to break the quiet. He slid the file toward Leonard, his voice hard as steel. "Leonard, is this your signature on the medical authorization for the patient Talia Monroe?" Leonard's mouth fell open as he stared at the page, where that familiar right slanting signature sat at the bottom. He stammered, I only signed to help, she wasn't." Lucid, Mr. Jensen cut him off. "Signed as her fiancé while your legal wife is sitting right here? Do you understand that means falsifying marital status on medical records, violating professional ethics, and federal insurance rules?" Leonard couldn't answer. His hands shook uncontrollably, his face loosening into the horror of a man realizing there's no way out. Across the table, Evan slammed his fork onto his plate with a sharp crack. "How long, Dad?" My son rasped, shaking with anger. "How long have you been betraying Mom?" Naomi sat beside him, tears streaming. She'd been the one who trusted her father most. Now that trust shattered like glass. "I can't believe it, Dad," she whispered. "You taught me a promise is the most sacred thing." Leonard forced a crooked smile, his voice warped. "You're misunderstanding. I was just helping a patient. Your mother has changed. I only—" Before he could finish, Ava Chen spoke up, clear and firm, "Helping a patient by using the marital account to pay for her psychiatric care, signing as fiancé, and then filing insurance? Mr. Carter, that constitutes financial fraud and medical fraud. The court will consider prosecution." Ava opened another folder and pulled out sheets listing the charges. "These are statements from First Union Bank showing you transferred money regularly to Miss Monroe's linked account, a total of $37,400 over 6 months, all from the joint savings account." Leonard broke into a sweat. I'll pay it back. It's just a misunderstanding." I raised my head, my voice calm and icy. "No need for you to pay it back. I've stated clearly in my petition, I will keep the entire house, 50% of the remaining assets, plus damages for emotional harm, and a clawback of all unlawful gifts to Talia Monroe." The room went dead quiet. Ava nodded, confirming. "Correct. The damages claim was filed with the divorce petition. The court can freeze assets as needed." Leonard flailed, choking on his words. "Diane, you can't do this. I lost control for a moment. I still love you." I let out a short laugh, not pained anymore, just bitter. "Love? People don't love by labeling their wife emotionally unstable in medical records, Leonard. You didn't lose control, you calculated. You just miscalculated for the first time." As soon as I finished, Simone pressed the button. The second clip played through the speakers. Leonard and Talia in the garage, tossing my certificates into a sack. His voice rang out, mercilessly clear. "What does she keep this stuff for? The past means nothing." Talia's laughter followed. "Now this house belongs to us." Everyone at the table went still. My mother-in-law clutched her chest, lips trembling. "My God, Leonard, what have you become?" One of our neighbors, Mr. Brooks, spoke carefully. I have to be honest, I saw that young woman's car parked at your house for days. I thought she was family. Leonard turned to him, grasping for dignity. That's a misunderstanding. But Mr. Brooks shook his head, voice heavy. No, Leonard. We saw you carry her suitcases inside. The neighborhood camera recorded it. Ava smiled slightly and closed the file. Then our case just gained an additional witness. Leonard lowered his head, fingers digging into the table's edge. No one said another word. Mr. Jensen, once his close friend for a decade, looked straight at Leonard, his voice chilling. I never thought a seasoned attorney could be this foolish. The firm's disciplinary panel meets Monday. Prepare for an indefinite suspension, Leonard. As his words landed, Leonard lifted his head, eyes desperate, searching for someone to defend him. No one spoke. Even his father, once so proud of his brilliant son, stared down at his lap, shoulders shaking with shame. I watched and felt no triumph. Only a cold lightness. After 42 years with this man, I was finally seeing his true face. No glow, no sweet words, just a stripped bare person amid the wreckage he created. I stood slowly and set my napkin on the table. All eyes turned to me. I looked straight at Leonard, my voice low but resolute. You know, Leonard, this is the last meal I'll ever cook for you. And the last time I'll call you my husband. He opened his mouth, but no words came. I turned and walked away from the table. Behind me, only a heavy silence remained, heavier than any accusation. I passed the hallway where the wedding photo that had been taken down now hung again because I'd had it rehung this morning, just so he'd have to see it one last time. In the picture, we smiled so brightly. I stopped and said softly, just for me. The girl in that photo died with her trust, but the woman walking away is alive and she'll live well. When I opened the door, the cold night wind swept in, carrying the faint smoke of the dying fireplace. I breathed deeply, feeling my chest lighten for the first time in months. Simone hurried after me, her hand on my shoulder. It's done, Diane. You did it. I nodded. No, Simone. Justice has only begun. That night, Ava and I went to her downtown office. The building lights reflected off the wood desk where we sat. Ava signed the last line, sealed the packet. Original divorce petition, damages claim, audio-video evidence, financial statements, and witness confirmations all complete. She set the nearly 2-inch thick file on the table, her voice certain. I'll file first thing in the morning. From now on, he can't touch you, not with words, not with the law, and certainly not with lies. I looked at the thick envelope labeled Leonard Carter v. Diane Carter and felt a strange calm. Ava, I said slowly. Today, when he looked around the table and no one spoke up for him, I realized sometimes justice doesn't need a gavel. It only needs the silence of people who once believed him. She smiled and nodded. Tomorrow morning, that silence will be the loudest sound. As we left, I paused to look out at the sleeping city. Streetlights stretched like a band of stars. I knew from here on, my past with Leonard was fully closed. And although the court would process everything tomorrow, the real verdict had already been read right there at the dinner table tonight, where he burned the perfect image he'd built. 4 months after the verdict dinner, I sat in courtroom 6 at the Franklin County Courthouse, watching the wall clock strike 10 a.m. Midday light slanted through the window onto the wooden table where attorney Ava Chen set the nearly 2-inch file. I said nothing, just listened to my heartbeat blend with the rustle of pages and the judge's gavel tapping lightly. The court ruled, all claims by the plaintiff, Diane Carter, are granted. The elements of adultery, emotional harm, and misuse of marital assets are all supported by admissible evidence. That sentence closed a 42-year marriage and opened a part of life I never thought I'd be brave enough to begin. Leonard didn't attend the final hearing. His representative, appointed temporarily after the firm suspended him, only filed a request to reduce financial penalties. The court denied it. Meanwhile, the Ohio bar opened an ethics investigation into Leonard. I felt no joy and no gloating, only that slow, steady motion of fairness. A few weeks later, the local paper ran a small note: Attorney Leonard Carter suspended for ethical violations and financial fraud. I folded the paper without finishing it. Every word only reminded me of the man I once loved, who destroyed himself with ambition and lies. Under the decree, the primary house was sold by court order. After costs, I received my full share, including 50% of the marital assets, emotional damages, and all attorney's fees. The money is enough for me to live comfortably, but more important, I am free. For the first time in years, I no longer worry about who's using the joint account, who's hiding bills, or who's building a guardianship file to seize control. One late March afternoon, while I was sorting papers, Talia's therapist called. His voice was gentle, hesitant. Mrs. Carter, the patient Talia Monroe, asked to send you a message. She's in therapy and wants to express remorse. She says Leonard told her, you two were legally separated. I was silent for a long time. I felt no anger, just a light, quiet space. Please tell her I accept her apology, I said softly. But we both know some doors, once closed, shouldn't be reopened. I hung up and looked at the sky through the window. Clouds drifted slowly, white tinged with gray, as peaceful as the morning after a storm. I chose not to hate Talia. She was a victim, too, of lies spoken in a calm voice with practiced eyes. I only hated the me from those old years, the woman who closed her eyes and believed kindness alone could keep someone. After the judgment, I rented a small apartment in German Village, lots of sunlight, a balcony overlooking maple trees. It was just over 700 square feet, and I decorated every corner in my own style: cream curtains, mint green ceramics, white shelves, and a small wood table by the window. I kept nothing that reminded me of Leonard: no photos, no gifts, no wedding ring. On the wall, I hung a landscape. I painted myself, the sun rising behind a mountain ridge. Every morning, when the first light floods the room, I know I'm still alive and living the way I choose. A month later, I got a call from the Columbus University Medical Center. They asked if I'd like to return part-time, not as a floor nurse, but as a clinical advisor for young nurses. I said yes. Stepping into those hospital corridors again made me tremble. The familiar antiseptic, the monitors, the soft squeak of rubber soles, all of it brought back a part of life I had loved and lost. But this time, I wasn't the wounded one. I returned as someone who'd learned. Healing others is easier than learning how to heal yourself. Around then, my old nursing school invited me to lecture ethics and boundaries in patient care. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of students, I smiled. None of them knew the woman speaking about professional boundaries had a husband who exploited those boundaries to ruin her name. But I knew that by turning my story into a lesson, I had made the pain useful. Those first evenings living alone, I kept an old habit, unconsciously brewing 2 cups of tea, one for me, one for the person who was gone. When I noticed, I laughed. Some habits don't need erasing, they need new meaning. Now I call that second cup. One for the past. I learned to walk alone along the Scioto River every Saturday morning. I put on headphones and played the old jazz Leonard used to hate for being too sad. I let the early wind thread through my hair and synced my heartbeat to the music. Each step confirmed I was still moving forward, not fast, but steadily. At night, I wrote in my journal, not to complain, but to be grateful. I was grateful for my health, my working hands, and a sister like Simone, who not only pulled me from a toxic marriage but taught me to stand tall without a brace. I was grateful for seeing Leonard's true nature painful, yes, but at least I no longer lived in illusion. I was grateful for the chance to rewrite my life, even late, and with my own hands. One evening, Simone stopped by with apple pie and hot cider. We sat on the balcony watching the streetlights glaze the leaves. She said, her voice light as a breeze, "You know, Diane, all those years you healed others, but in the end, the person you saved was yourself." I looked at her and smiled. I only did what a nurse must do, keep the patient alive through the crisis. This time the patient was me. Simone laughed, eyes wet. We clinked our cups and said nothing more. In the night wind, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The next day, I opened my laptop and typed the first line of a new project, a small book about recovering from emotional trauma. My working title, Healing Isn't Forgetting, It's Continuing to Live. As the words appeared, I realized, all this time I hadn't lost anything. I'd only removed what was no longer me. Leonard may lose his reputation, his money, and the house he once bragged about. But I have something he never understood. The serene freedom of someone who has forgiven not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I closed my journal and wrote the last line. Day 122, I'm still here, still, breathing, still living, and at last I have healed myself. The following spring, when the cherry blossoms on my balcony had just bloomed, I applied to a program supporting older women who've suffered emotional and financial abuse, a nonprofit run by the Ohio Women's Council. I wasn't asking for help, I was applying as a volunteer. The interview took place in a small room painted soft blue, smelling of paper and warm coffee. The coordinator asked gently, "Mrs. Carter, what makes you want to join the program?" I smiled and answered slowly, "Because I know what it's like to be made to doubt your own memory, your own worth, and your own sanity. I was a nurse. I used to save people. Then at some point, I forgot I needed saving too." She nodded and asked nothing more. I started the next week. My work was simple. Listen, take notes, accompany, and share. I sat through sessions with silver-haired women, hollow-eyed, speaking in shaky voices about not knowing whether they were wrong or being made to believe they were wrong. I listened to them the way I'd listen to patients, with full respect for their pain. At the program, I learned something decades of marriage never taught me. A woman's sixth sense is not jealousy, it's survival. It's the small voice in your head when everything seems normal but isn't. It's the chill up your spine when someone says, "I only want what's best for you." It's the moment you see tenderness used as a cover for control. I shared that in a group session. A gray-haired woman squeezed my hand. "You're right. We're taught to be gentle, when what we need is to be clear-eyed." I smiled. Exactly. And being clear-eyed isn't cruelty, it's survival. I also learned to tell intuition from paranoia. Intuition comes from observation and experience. It's gentle but certain, like a steady heartbeat. Paranoia comes from fear and unhealed wounds. It's loud, urgent, and always demands an immediate answer. I wrote that in my journal with a note. From now on, care for yourself the way you care for patients. Patiently, kindly, without judgment. One evening, Evan came by. My son seemed more grown up after everything. He brought sunflowers and a box of cinnamon tea and set them on the small kitchen table. As we drank tea, he asked, his voice low and sincere, "Do you have any regrets, Mom, after all this?" I looked at him. The lamplight on his face, his features favored Leonard's, but the eyes were mine, calm, unbowed. "I don't regret leaving," I said. "I only regret staying silent for so long." Evan nodded and held my hand, as if he understood everything I didn't say. A few days later, Naomi called from Chicago, where she teaches at the university. Her voice was clear and light. "Mom, I just saw the update about Dad. The firm officially pulled his license. I know you're not happy about it, but you won beautifully. I smiled softly. No, Naomi, I didn't win. I simply came back to life. That afternoon, I reclaimed the professional certificates Leonard had thrown into a sack. The police had recovered them during the investigation and returned them to me. I cleaned each glass frame, peeled off the old tape, and hung them on the wall of my little office. The words Diane Carter recognized for 30 years of service to community health gleamed in the sunlight. I stood looking for a long time. Not out of regret, but because I felt I'd pieced together a legacy that had been broken. On my desk, I wrote a new list, not a to-do list, but a boundary list for every relationship. I titled it, Things I Will No Longer Ask Permission to Be Myself. 1. I have the right to say no without explaining. 2. I have the right to stay silent when I need to protect my peace. 3. I have the right to choose who gets to be close and who must remain outside. 4. I have the right not to forgive immediately. 5. I have the right to love myself just as much as I love others. When I finished writing, I taped that paper beside the mirror, right where I brush my hair every morning. That evening, I opened the small box in the drawer where I used to keep the watch from our 40th anniversary. The face still shone, the hands still moved, but I no longer wore it. I just looked at it and smiled. Back then, I thought time was what took my youth away. Now I understand. Time has been turning back toward me. I closed the lid and put it away, not to forget but to remember. I once lived, was once betrayed, and still had enough courage to love my life. At the end of the month, I sent 2 small gifts. One to Simone, a silver bracelet engraved, for the one who stood beside me when the world fell apart, and one to Ava, a gold-plated pen engraved, Truth Has a Voice. Both replied that evening. Simone, I don't need gifts, only to see you happy. Ava, if anyone asks what justice looks like, I'll say, like Diane Carter, resilient but kind. I read the messages, let out a laugh, and realized tears had fallen without my noticing. That night, I opened my laptop. On the screen, the old folder appeared, Project 312. I opened it one last time and looked at the files, photos, recordings, evidence, journals, and the lines I'd written in despair. Each item was a stitch on the body of my spirit. I chose Rename to change the folder's name. The keyboard lit up, Project Diane. I pressed Enter. The new name appeared, tidy and clear. I sat there for a long time, feeling my heart as calm as a still lake. That project, born from betrayal, had become the case file of my rebirth. I closed the laptop, brewed a cup of peppermint tea, and stood by the window watching the city light up. Amid distant traffic and a breeze scented with flowers, I whispered, I'm no longer the woman of room 312. I'm Diane Carter, the one who learned to stand up, love herself, and rewrite her life with the truth. Then I took a sip of tea, its warmth spreading over my tongue, gentle as the peace I had waited for all my life. A year passed from the day I renamed Project 312 to Project Diane. Time did what it does best, washed clean, healed, and left such fine scars that I no longer hurt when I looked at them. I read the legal section of a morning paper. Leonard Carter permanently stripped of his law license and ordered to repay all misused funds. That ruling closed the final chapter of the story I once thought would bury me forever. I felt no glee, no bitterness, only a weightlessness, as if I had set down a suitcase I'd carried too long. I didn't need to win. I only needed to live in the truth. My new work at the medical center settled into a rhythm. After a few months as an advisor, I was invited to serve as a part-time nursing supervisor. I no longer ran night shifts or listened to ventilators in the ICU, but every day I had the chance to teach young nurses how to stay calm in a crisis. I often began training with one line: when you're standing in chaos, what a patient needs isn't the strongest person, but the calmest one in the room. And sometimes, looking at those focused young faces, I realized I wasn't just speaking to them, I was speaking to the me at 50, at 60, who once thought she'd collapse when everything fell apart. On quiet afternoons, I wrote a short piece for the local medical journal. I titled it, "Love Needs No Evidence, Betrayal Does." I told gently how people can keep a smile when they're doubted, and how truth can arrive not with shouting, but with carefully prepared silence. The article was shared more than I expected. One reader commented, "Thank you. You made me believe that 60 isn't an ending, but a chance to start living honestly." I smiled, feeling warm inside. Perhaps that was the best reward I'd ever received, not money, not status, but connection with souls who had been hurt and still chose to rise. Sometimes I still sent thank you notes to those who believed me even when I couldn't believe myself: Simone, Ava, and the friends in the women's support group. We met once a month just to drink coffee and talk about little things, a new pie recipe, or how to grow orchids in a small apartment. No one mentioned the past anymore. But in every glance, I knew. We all understood what it means to survive. I learned to eat dinner alone, without feeling lonely. The table now had one plate, one glass, one small candle, yet it was warm. I put on an old jazz track, sliced bread, drizzled a little honey, and felt complete. I used to fear emptiness. Now I call it space. The difference is small, but it's the boundary between someone still afraid to live and someone who's learned how. I understood what a lifetime of marriage finally taught me. Marriage is paperwork. Companionship is a choice, one that must be renewed every day. Leonard once chose me, then stopped. And now, I choose myself every morning, every breath, every step. One April morning, I walked to the community center and saw a poster on the door. "If you feel something is wrong inside you and no one believes it, believe yourself." I stood and smiled. Maybe someone from our group had heard me say that and turned it into this year's campaign slogan. A small circle of trust, passed along simple and strong. That evening, I sat in my apartment reading letters from strangers who wrote after the article. They shared their own stories: cold marriages, slow bravery, mornings when they looked in the mirror and no longer saw themselves as worthless. I answered each one, no advice, just a few lines. "I believe you. Keep going, even slowly. Peace is waiting at the end of the road." Sometimes that's all a person needs to hear. I wrote the last line in my journal: "I no longer count time by the day Leonard betrayed me. I count it by the mornings I wake up and feel at peace." Right then, the doorbell rang. I opened it to a young woman in a nursing uniform. In her hands were bright yellow tulips and a small card. She smiled, eyes shining. "Miss Diane, I'm Lisa, your student at the center. Today, I got my official job offer. I just wanted to thank you for teaching me that staying calm is its own kind of courage." I took the flowers, too moved to speak. The petals were delicate, bright as a blessing for a new season. The card read, "Thank you for teaching me how to stand firm." When the door closed, I set the flowers in a glass vase and drew the curtains. Afternoon sun poured in, clear and radiant. The light reflected on the wall, bathing the embroidered words I'd framed long ago. Project Diane, a journey that begins in pain and ends in light. I stood still, letting the sunlight write my name across a new wall. No longer the betrayed woman, no longer a victim, no one else but myself. Diane Carter, 66, living a small life that is free, serene, and true. I sipped my tea, a faint smile on my lips. Outside, birds called in the late day, and the wind moved through the maples like a blessing. Softly, I spoke to myself and to anyone listening to this story. If one day your gut tells you something is wrong and no one believes you, please believe yourself. Intuition is never the enemy, it's the gatekeeper of the soul. I looked at the bouquet, breathed deeply, and felt something I once thought I had lost forever: faith in myself. Then I went back to the desk, opened my laptop, and typed the opening lines of a new story. Not about Leonard, not about betrayal, but about the power of peace. And if you've stayed with me to the very end of this journey, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for listening, for sharing this moment with me, whether you're in New York, Seattle, Dallas, or anywhere in the world. What city are you listening from? Tell me in the comments below. If this story touched you, a like or a subscription would be a warm encouragement for me to keep telling the brave recoveries of people who seem to have fallen but then stood up, like I did. And like every morning in my new life, I say softly, tomorrow, the sunlight will call our names again.